Judges, would you please introduce yourselves?
Yes, I'm Marcia Holland in Missoula, Montana. I'll be chief judge for this hearing. I'm an attorney who was a career public defender in Alaska, but upon moving back to Montana, I've been teaching at the law school here. So I appreciate having been through 9 Zoom mock trials this semester, that I'm really happy that the Center for Civic Education was able to maintain this national competition, and look forward to hearing from you.
Good afternoon. My name is Becca Steinhoff. I am joining today from Casper, Wyoming. I am the executive director of a private family foundation, the John P. L. Bogan Foundation, and also very much look forward to hearing from you and the discussion that follows.
Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Barnhart. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm an attorney at the Indiana Attorney General's Office. I practice in consumer protection law, and I'm looking forward to the discussion as well.
And if you can introduce yourself, and if there's anyone that has supported you, a mentor, a teacher, or a coach, if you can acknowledge them as well.
Hi, my name is Mina Nishtala.
Hi, I'm Claire Mullings.
And I'm Shreya Shah. Today we have our sponsor, Mrs. Willits, with us, who's been a great support. We're really excited to have you guys all here with us today and really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks. And so it won't be a surprise. It's Unit 6, Question 2. I will read it. It's in its entirety, even though you know what it says. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Do you agree or disagree, and why? What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence?" You may begin.
Although Americans have found solidarity in war, the forces that drive us to conflict are not always patriotic or selfless. Just as President Washington advised against foreign entanglements in his farewell address, Dwight D. Eisenhower warned against affairs between private industries and the government, coining the term military-industrial complex.
We agree with Eisenhower's claim. The Senate and President must always be wary of private influences due to war profiteering. Fear-mongering rhetoric in the late 1800s, like accusing Queen Liliuokalani of, quote, sorcery, adultery, promiscuity, and treason, motivated the United States to intervene on behalf of the United Fruit Company and Dole in both Latin America and Hawaii. Recently, Honeywell, Raytheon, and Boeing have exacerbated Middle Eastern conflicts through weapon sales.
On the other hand, the United States feels morally obligated to police international relations, especially as a founder of the UN. Given the US's desire to uphold international democracy, the rapid spread of communism and the proliferation of nuclear weapons motivated the United States military to interfere in Vietnam, Korea, and Afghanistan during the Red Scare.
Furthermore, Eisenhower's wariness predates 9/11, a historical tragedy that altered American security and global relations. Following this terrorist attack, Congress wielded their ability to create cabinets, as alluded to in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, by passing the Homeland Security Act. Although the private sphere profits from Middle Eastern conflict, the United States originally used military force to ease public unrest by actively combating terrorism in the Middle East.
In the founding era, debates regarding a standing military diverged from Federalist and Anti-Federalist dichotomies. In Brutus 10 and Anti-Federalist 24 and 25, some founders were wary that a standing army would resemble Cromwellian England, a tyrannical government that used soldiers to subjugate citizens. Federalists countered, motivated by the inability to quell Shays' rebellion, that maintaining a standing army would protect Americans from sudden threats and be more effective than state militias, according to Federalist 28. As a response to this concern, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12 of the Constitution allowed Congress to, quote, raise and support armies financially. With this new power of a standing army, Washington was able to swiftly put down the Whiskey Rebellion.
Federalist and anti-federalist arguments are still pertinent today. The threats of 9/11 and Pearl Harbor indicate the constant possibility of external perils. Conversely, the pacifist protests during the Vietnam conflict illustrate that many Americans oppose unnecessary militaristic pursuits, despite the president being named commander-in-chief in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. Due to the decisive actions of the National Guard during BLM protests, anti-federalist concern over the dangers of a standing army have resurged. The duality of American perspectives on the role of the National Guard and military continue to polarize modern politics, especially given contentions about U.S. intervention overseas.
Therefore, the United States should only interfere when there is a direct advantage for the American people. As promised in the Department of State's mission statement, excessive military force risks American lives and diverts resources from government welfare programs. Furthermore, despite good intentions, U.S. military action can and has damaged global stability. For example, in an effort to curb the influence of the USSR in the Congo, the CIA organized a political coup to overthrow Patrice Lumumba, but unfortunately, the interference resulted in a long-lasting regional stability.
As the United States considers future potential militarization, it is important to reflect on our past victories. But perhaps the commander-in-chief should also take into account international defeats, especially when risking American lives and possibly shattering peace and stability in the long run.
Thank you. And now we'll begin with questions. Becca?
Thank you. You noted in your opening statement that private industry was a part of this military industrial complex. Can you elaborate a little more on the role that they play or the influence that they have? And then maybe if that is or is not the best influence that should be had.
So the role of private industry is a complex one, and this has been the case ever since Executive Order 10340 by President Truman during a massive steel strike. Because the Truman reasoned that steel strike diverted resources that could contribute to ammunition and military resources, he seized control of these private industries, claiming that it would protect American security.
Controversially, we can also see the Supreme Court case specifically, Youngstown Sheet and Tube Co. versus Sawyer, a few years later, which actually set the precedent that said that crisis has to be big enough, has to be imperative enough in order for an executive to act on it, which is something which we didn't see in this scenario specifically. Therefore, that would have been ruled against in that scenario.
Therefore, to directly answer your question, corporations have influenced foreign policy in the past. Specifically, what Eisenhower is addressing is the fact that that private influences can influence military action, and the fact that they can urge the military to go to foreign lands and to for private reasons. For example, we provide in our paper the examples of Latin America and the United Fruit Company, as well as Dole in Hawaii. And these are examples where corporations had a desire to seek the natural resources of that region and therefore promoted and lobbied US officials in order to pursue the conflict there, which resulted in the annexation of Hawaii and the big stick diplomacy of in Latin America. However, conversely, we also see a positive influence from non-governmental organizations, which is where there are nonprofit organizations really that work with almost a charity effort. For example, the CARE organization helped pass the Global Food and Stability Act and the FY 2010 State and Foreign Operation Bill, which actually helped provide food and stability internationally, despite this actually being private influence pushing this policy. So we see that although corporations have influenced in order to drive the United States to conflict, they have also had a positive benefit in regards to non-governmental organizations.
Thank you.
Scott, you're on mute.
Thank you. I appreciate that. First time today. So if the government were to pivot and contract via in terms of the number of troops and also financially the amount of money that we spend, I'm interested in your take on what impact that would have on the rest of the world and their view of whether the U.S. would remain a superpower or not.
So this is an interesting question, especially after World War II. The United States felt the need to develop a more international role. And as the country grew more powerful and more responsible as a global nation, especially as a founder of the UN and a would-be founder of the League of Nations, the United States has a moral responsibility to monitor humanitarian crises and act during global times of need.
Specifically, we can see in more rural nations where aid is more necessary in order to provide for their people, that moral obligation is very necessary. And so the US involvement is very much appreciated. However, on the other hand, we can see in situations such as in the Middle East, where we have excessive military presence there, this has commonly instigated more terrorism, as well as having an increase in US resentment.
Well, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
While Sharia is touching on the Afghanistan drone strikes that President Obama utilized, that actually led to an increase in US resentment simply because the drone strikes were often ineffective and actually attacked innocent civilians. I would argue that hindsight is always 2020. We can always say that we should not have entered conflicts. However, realistically, in the example of Saudi Arabia, although it is an authoritarian regime, we are providing Saudi Arabia military aid. And now our military aid is so essential to combating the human rights crisis in Yemen, and specifically combating the genocide that the Houthi rebels are undertaking in Yemen. We can see that our role is so essential simply because, for example, the Air Force, which is an essential part of the military pursuit in Saudi Arabia, is dependent on US planes, specifically Boeing, simply because that equipment is the only one that the US utilizes. And we are the only country that is so fixated on Boeing's products that it is realistically impossible to 100% switch this. So were the United States to withdraw, as you stated in your question, we would see the same failure in terms of being able to negotiate peace, which there was a ceasefire in the summer of 2018 that was actually due to US influence. So although we may escalate conflicts at times, unfortunately, once again, hindsight is always 2020, but also US presence, although not actively there, although we are not actively sending troops, military aid and the hegemony of the United States does bolster countries' reputations.
So let me talk about looking into the future rather than hindsight. So the future of war or the face of war is probably going to be very different in the future and involve a lot more technology and cyber attacks. We may not see drone attacks within US soil, but you could knock out an entire economy by attacking Wall Street, or even just take out Pentagon computers and prevent any kind of action taken at some other location. How do you think money should be reallocated within military spending to recognize that what a war might look like in 5 years is very different than what it looked like in World War II?
So I would actually contest that perhaps we should withdraw some of our resources from our nuclear weapons program. Although I understand that this is a large part of the United States' reputation, mutually assured destruction and deterrence has deterred any use of nuclear weapons since World War II. And I believe that we should reallocate some of the funding, specifically money that would be used to replace the nuclear weapons that do expire. We should reallocate that to cyber technology in order to combat, as you said, the potential of hacking of Wall Street, et cetera, and the massive impacts that could have on the economy.
My teammate brings up a good point. As we can see, like online interference and cyber hacking has been a recent concern, especially during contentions about possible Russian involvement during the last election. So it is imperative, as my colleague said, to redirect some of our efforts into this emerging new threat, as you mentioned, of cybersecurity.
Additionally, bouncing off what Mina just said, cyber technology is extending beyond just the economy, which is the basis of our country. It extends into our democracy, into our ideals, and the threat that cybersecurity, that another country that we are not only uncomfortable with, that we at times view as an enemy, could interfere with the foundation of our country is a much greater concern, especially since it's not the same on-ground attacks that we've had in the past.
Thank you. And thank you very much for your presentation. And take a deep breath. We'll provide a few comments back, and then you're done for the day, we hope. Let me just look at my notes. I really appreciated the concepts of beginning with Washington and the term of foreign entanglements and moving on to Eisenhower and the quote that we were looking at that formed the question. The examples you used were very unique and interesting, like the big stick diplomacy in Latin America and taking over Hawaii, which ended up in we ended up with another state because of that action. I thought those were really thoughtful because they provide a different point of view that a lot of us think about in terms of how the military can impact, just life, so to speak. I thought the first of the two sub bullet points, I thought you did a really good job at answering that very thoroughly. And so thank you for thinking about the amount of information that we might be expecting as judges and providing that information. And finally, your closing statement in your prepared remarks, I thought was really powerful too. I didn't have time to write it down, but I just thought it really brought us back full circle, and it was a really strong way to end. And then finally, your practical answer, I think it was one of the more recent ones where we just might need to do something a little differently, was really, sometimes it's just the practical answers that are the best answers. So I wish I could have written down exactly what that was, but I like that you're not just thinking in terms of theory, but practicality as well. So good job.
I would echo so much of what Marcia just said, in particular, calling out the examples and the evidence that you offered. There was so much and just really relevant but unique evidence, I think, to support where you were headed. And so it's so interesting when we get to this point in the day and we hear new content. It's just so exciting. We can't even tell you how exciting it is. And that just happened from the moment that you opened your remarks and continued all the way through the question and answer period. One other thing I'll note here, I appreciate that you, and this is similar to acknowledging the practicality, but also the complexity. And so I think that's just really inherent to some of the questions that fit within this Unit 6 space, certainly here. And so I can appreciate that you acknowledge that, and as much as you took a stance and answered those questions, just acknowledge the dynamics and the complexity of what is a dynamic and complex issue. I also really just appreciate your passion for this. This is the sort of question where we wondered what kind of passion we would receive from students. And you've done so much research, and you have an incredible depth and breadth of knowledge as it relates to the content that you shared with us. And it's impressive. And I appreciate that you carried that through your remarks and into the questions. So very well done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought you all did very, very well. I think this is a question that's easy to get wrapped up in ideology, and I have this very big picture view of how things should be, and your realistic perspective is refreshing. And so from that standpoint, I really appreciated that. I also appreciated your use of historical examples many of which we hadn't heard before, and also the examples that you used in follow-up. It's easy to kind of write down the examples in a paper and include them there, and you study that, but it's more difficult to incorporate those in follow-up, because when you do, it's a demonstration that you really understand the material. So well done. I really enjoyed the discussion.
And I just want to say thanks. And if we were guessing where you're from, I think the air fans above each of your heads would give us a clue that you're at least in a southern part of the United States. Thank you so much for being here.
You are the second judge to say that. Our last panel just said that to us. They were like, "You're air fans. Yeah, you guys are definitely from somewhere hot. We're from Arizona."
So the rest of the country didn't have air fans.
Yeah.
Well, I have one, but it's not warm enough here to use it. So that's the other key.
I noticed it because one of my law students, since we were all on Zoom, was in a warm climate, and he had a fan on over his head, but his head was closer to the fan, so it looked like he had a little propeller hat on. So I actually had to ask him to turn his fan off during the mock trial, because it was actually a little distracting. But your heads are not even close to where his was. So I've been looking at air fans more than once this month. But thank you so much.